unceded territory of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, and just a couple doors down from me, someone I haven't seen in a while. I was on vacation. I was in Germany, excited to see our astronomer, and that is Marley Leacock. Hey, Marley, how's it going?
It's good. Welcome back from your gallivanting on
Well, and
holiday.
you were also gallivanting too, because in July, you weren't around for those episodes. So,
Nope.
nice to reconnect here. We've got some fun stuff. Of course, space news is still happening. The universe is still going, regardless if we're here chatting about it or not. So we've got some fun stories to talk about in this edition of Ask an Astronomer. If you are out there watching on YouTube, maybe even on Instagram, then you should get in here and ask your questions. If you've got a question about the universe, we've got half an hour that we're going to be live. We will take all of your questions and hopefully answer them with some good knowledge, or at least some witty banter. That's what we do here on Ask an Astronomer. So get on here, ask your questions. Marley, we've got some interesting things happening up there in space, some slightly frightening things happening in space. You've compiled together some of your favorite stories. Of course, also a celestial event that we can all experience. Marley, what is going up there above our heads?
What is going on indeed? So much to cover in half an hour, and also so much that I also probably don't know about. But the big story that we cover every year around this time is, of course, the Perseid or the Perseids, however you say it. I've always said Perseid. Meteor shower. So this annual meteor shower, visible from Vancouver and a lot of places in the northern hemisphere, it's a big deal. It's one of the meteor showers we're able to see where it's not freezing cold, so we can actually enjoy being out there and seeing it. Its parent comet is Comet Swift-Tuttle, or Comet 109P, if you want to say it that way. It peaks, or it happens every year between mid-July to the end of August, beginning of September. And this year, it's going to peak from August 11th until August 12th. So that night between those two. And this image is actually of Comet Swift-Tuttle, photographed from April 4th, 1892, and April 6th, 1892, by Professor E. Barnard. So it's a very common shower. It happens every single year because every year the Earth passes through the trail of debris that this comet has left behind in its orbit around our sun. So, how
Okay.
are you able to see them? This is a question I get a lot. You don't want to use a telescope. Don't do that.
Mm.
With a meteor shower, you want to have a large area of dark sky. So, get out of the city if you can. At the very least, get to a place where the city lights are behind you. That helps as well. And you want to be able to see as much sky as possible because while the constellation where the meteors appear to originate from is Perseus, hence the name, they can come from any part of the sky. So you're going to want to get a large area of the sky to see as much as you can. And for this time, the peak night, 11th to 12th, happens to be the best night, but this isn't always the case. For viewing, for those of us who are going to go out and try, go after the moon has set. So the moon sets at
Mm.
10:58 p.m. This way, there's even less light in the sky that will hide those fainter meteors, and you'll have a pretty good chance during that night. But a reminder that as soon as the peak ends, like as soon as it gets past the peak night, it drops off really rapidly. So the amount of meteors you have the chance of seeing just start to drop really quickly past the peak night. So kind of this weekend is going to be, or this Sunday Monday is going to be your next last kind of great chance. But the following week will be okay, but not the best, especially as we get towards that full moon as well.
Awesome. And quite ironically, because this year for me personally, I have not had a great night sky viewing experience. Almost every time I kind of go out, there's been some sort of like weather challenges. The last big aurora viewing, I was actually in Lethbridge at a dark sky site, ended up being cloudy. Um, and then I went to a few other places, a little bit cloudy too. On my vacation, of course, I was in Berlin, not a great night sky viewing place, even though there's many great observatories in Berlin, lots of light pollution. Went to Ireland, which ended up being like very cloudy, as is usually in Ireland. However, we were got lost on our drive back from Northern Ireland, and we got so lost that we were going down these tiny roads that had no streetlights. And I pulled over to go pee, and I looked up, and there was Milky Way above me. I had not
Nice.
seen a dark sky that in a long time, and that was primarily due because in Ireland, unless you're on the main road, they don't have street lights. And so the full effect of light pollution was really, really present for me there. Is that even in a very populated place, it's really these extra lights that cause this light pollution, the cumulative light pollution that happens in our spaces. So it's a good reminder that even in your own backyard, you can create a little pocket of some dark sky. As long as you don't have lights in your periphery vision so that you can be in a dark place, let your eyes dark adapt. And even if you do have, say, like, a backyard, that is still a good condition for you to potentially see some of these meteors.
Yeah, you just, it's hard because, like, I know a lot of people in the lower mainland or in Vancouver proper don't necessarily drive. So leaving
Yeah.
the city to get to a dark place is difficult, but just go to as dark of a place as you can, especially if you can somehow get to a spot that's high up also helps because then you're kind of above some of that light scatter, but also try to have it behind you. And that's
Yeah.
like the best advice I can give as
Yeah.
someone who doesn't drive.
And also another really good reminder for all of you out there is that we like to use these things, with us,
Oh,
to
yeah.
be checking our things, but this gives off light just as much as anything else. So you can put red filters on your phone that you can go to dark mode. The most important thing that you can do to help you see some of these, tiny little streaks of light in the sky is to make sure that your eyes are dark adapted. So get away from white light, turn off as many lights as possible, and don't use the phone
Don't use
as
your
much
phone. Yeah.
as possible, or at
Yeah.
least use those red lights. So,
And give yourself a couple hours. It's not like a
yeah,
a deluge of meteor. You got to
that's
give yourself
right.
some time to see a couple. So it's you're in for a while. But we're
It's
also having an event, so there's that too.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is a patient experience, something that you want to bring some snacks,
Mm-hmm.
something warm to drink, although it is, pretty warm nights. But if you want to get all the information, of course, Marley is showing you here that we've got an event. We've got a special planetarium show that one of our best stargazers that we have on staff, very experienced John Reed, is going to be doing our special planetarium show. He's going to tell you all about where comets and asteroids fit into the celestial story. And you'll also be having an opportunity to go out to our observatory. However, caveat, as Marley said, the best place you want to be is actually not where we're located here, but there's going to be tons of nerdy, passionate and knowledgeable people that'll be working here. So if you got questions, come on down tomorrow night for our special event. Great. So that is the most pressing news story. Of course, if you have any more questions about that, put them into the chat. But speaking of tiny objects in our solar system, we've got some news about Bennu and OSIRIS-REx that returned last year, and they were trying to figure out how to open up that capsule.
Yeah.
Couldn't get it open. Is there a dad somewhere that could open up
Oh, find your
that?
nearest Midwestern dad. Yeah.
What's going on with OSIRIS-REx?
So as you'll remember, yes, Osiris Rex, tapped that little asteroid Bennu in the touch and go maneuver, as they call it, and it collected a sample and it, shot it back to Earth. The actual spacecraft itself is now on to a further target. I think it's asteroid Apophis, I believe, where it's just going to take some pictures. Not going to collect anything, but at least just check it out. But the sample did return to Earth on its date it was supposed to, September 24th, 2023. This is an image of its return. The capsule, the outside is all charred from the re-entry through Earth's atmosphere. So it got all burned and very hot. So they had to build a lot about keeping the inside material from getting super warm, which means that this capsule is very robust, right? It is very intense and very purposefully designed so that nothing affects the sample. We want to keep the sample as pristine as possible in order to keep our science as good as we possibly can. We don't want it to get impacted by Earth's atmosphere, Earth's air. Even when we open and study the sample, we are wearing, like, it's in a clean room, right? We are going into the glove box. We put our hands into gloves and move around that way. It is a temperature controlled, air controlled, very, very clean and safe environment. So this is an image of Lockheed Martin recovery specialists. They're removing the lid off of the sample return canister. And what they found were dark powder and sand-sized particles on what's called the avionics deck, which in this little diagram here, the avionics deck is this little part-ish in here is where that avionics deck is. So they found some material already on the avionics deck after the initial lid was taken off. The whole canister got to Houston on September 25th, and it got put into this special new lab designed specifically for the OSIRIS-REx mission. So they built not just this, spacecraft and all the technology necessary to collect the sample. They also built an entire clean room box for the analysis of the sample or initial collection of the sample. So this is a view of the outside of the OSIRIS-REx sample collector. In this initial sample, these tiny, tiny, tiny little bits and pieces here are parts of the asteroid. They found evidence of carbon and water in the very initial analysis of that material. They wanted to get at least 60 grams total. And when they opened the lid from just this alone, they got about 70 grams. So already this kind of excess spill off had exceeded what they wanted to get, all this extra stuff. This is a kind of cool, I like it because Brian May did it. It's a stereoscopic image of the sample. If you relax your eyes, it like makes it look like it's coming out of the screen. I've never
Mm.
successfully done this. I have bad eyes, but it's cool if you can get it to work. But this material is from the top of the tag SAM, and each little boulder that you're looking at is actually quite small. It's only about a centimeter across. And of the stuff from that hardware, like I said, was about 70 grams over that 60-gram benchmark. So what they had processed so far at the time that this was put out, which was about September, early October, was the rocks from and dust on the outside of the sampler head and some from the inside because they pushed down on that mylar flap to kind of scoop it out. And the reason why they had to push down on the mylar flap is because they couldn't open it. So this was a really big problem. In October, they said that we can't get it open. The part of the tag SAM head was still fastened shut. There were 35 fasteners. You can kind of make out maybe what they are. They weren't pretty sure it's like kind of secretive, but you can kind of make out where these screws are and kind of imagine based on the diagram where those might be. But 2 of those 35 fasteners could not be opened with the tools they had approved and put into that glove box clean room apparatus. And so they were able to hold down this black flap and use some tweezers and a scoop and get some material out. But as of October, they were still trying to open it. And it was kind of on pause until then, until January when they finally opened
Mm.
it. So they were finally able to open it January 11th, 2024. And those 2 fasteners were finally removed. I can't spell, ignore this. Finally removed. And we finally kind of broke the tag SAM open. These 2, though the new tools designed had to be made of specific materials so that it, number 1, didn't affect the scientific value of the Bennu sample. And 2, the tools also had to function inside the tightly confined space of the glove box. Their height, their weight, how much they rotated and moved was all limited by being inside of this clean room. But they finally opened it, which is great. So you can see here how much more sample there was for them to collect and for them to study. And this leads to one of the first papers being published. So they opened it in January, and one of the first papers was published in June, late June. So this image is from that paper. It's published in Meteorotics and Planetary Science is the name of the journal. The total sample amount now sits at 121.6 grams, which is over twice of what they wanted. And at least 70% of that sample will be preserved at Johnson Space Center for further research for scientists around the world. But they also hold on to some of the sample for future scientists, like future generations of scientists. They did this also with lunar samples because they knew that our technology at the time might not be able to explore everything we want about the sample, but technology in the future might be able to. So they always hold on to a little bit. There's a cohort of more than 200 scientists around the world, and that includes scientists with the Canadian Space Agency and even a scientist at the University of British Columbia are part of the people that will get part of this sample to study it. But their very, very early analysis is actually very, very exciting, but again, very early. So they found that it was rich in carbon, nitrogen, and organic compounds, which is not
Mm.
surprising. When we looked at Bennu, like with OSIRIS-REx, we knew it was very carbon rich. It's the type of asteroid it is. We knew there was nitrogen. We knew there was some organic compounds. But what was surprising to us was this presence of phosphate, specifically magnesium sodium phosphate. That was not detected from prior science on Bennu with OSIRIS-REx. Similar phosphate was found in the Ryugu sample, the asteroid Ryugu sample from JAXA, from their Hayabusa 2 mission. They did a very similar thing of touching the asteroid, collecting a sample, and bringing it back to Earth back, I think it was in 2020. But the phosphate found in Bennu is much more pure than the Ryugu sample, which is surprising. And the size of the grains are much larger. And the purity that they've detected and the size of the grains is kind of unprecedented in any type of sample that we've gotten. So this, made scientists very, very excited. And the presence of this specific phosphate and the amount of clay minerals that are present and dominant in the sample give hints that asteroid Bennu may have come from a very primitive young ocean world. It may have been a piece of it that maybe got, knocked off, who knows, because the rocks that, like, the materials we're finding inside of the Bennu sample are very similar to what we find in ocean rocks in mid-ocean ridges here on Earth. So it's
Oh,
very much a young world maybe that, never fully formed.
that's amazing. So, I mean, it's hard to imagine, I don't know if I was even expecting, that Bennu, given that it's a small world, could have come or even have had an ocean. So, what are some of the theories of how or where this may have come from?
Somewhere in the early days of our solar system, like it's still a very, very uh like it's very much still a time capsule. Like it's still
Yeah.
very much very similar to like early days of our solar system. So it would
Okay.
have been a really, really primitive, very early on world. And it may not have been an ocean world in the sense that it had huge flowing oceans and water on top of it, but it may have been what could have been an ocean world because it
Hmm.
has all of these things there. It's still, they call it chemically primitive because it's still very similar in composition to what our sun is made of. There's a lot of hydrogens and things like that. So it's still very young in the sense of that it just didn't get to develop very far. But it's the fact that this phosphate is there and the fact that those clays are there is what is gearing scientists up for like this much more intense scrutiny and much more intense science on it of trying to determine like what would have happened to this world. Right, that's the question they're still looking to answer.
Okay. So, really exciting stuff. We should probably, check back in with the team at UBC because there is a UBC connection. I wonder if any of them been studying this. We've got some planning some programs for next year. Asteroids and of course planetary defense are all a big part of the curiosities that lots of organizations are interested in. I'm certainly interested in this, so I'm going to be keeping my eye on this and how it develops. Now, another big story, another big focus for us that we've been talking a lot about is humans in space. And we've been talking a little bit about the ISS and its implications, even its future for the next decade. Now, we've got a bit of an issue that's happened, and it's an interesting time for commercial space to be growing. And I think we finally hit that first snag in the issue of what happens with some of these companies and bringing humans. No one's in danger yet, but there's a bit of
I mean,
an annoyance.
you're in
Yeah.
space, it's dangerous.
Yeah. So tell us what's happening with Starliner and the astronauts that are on the ISS right now.
Yeah, Starliner. So that, I mean, problems if you're one company in particular. Yeah, so Starliner Starliner is the Boeing spacecraft, right? So we are much more familiar with SpaceX's Dragon capsule. Starliner is kind of their answer to the Dragon, right? They've also been contracted by NASA, Boeing has, to provide a crew capsule for crew to and from the International Space Station, as opposed to, NASA no longer has the space shuttle. The Soyuz rockets are, Soyuz capsules are kind of on the way out, trying to make a new type of environment for it. So Starliner was one of the contracted inventions to do so. It was plagued by delays from the beginning, which didn't surprise me very much because spaceflight's hard. Spaceflight with people's even harder. It finally did launch on June 5th, and it docked with the ISS on June 6th. So it was a
Okay.
pretty short trip. It was meant to be an 8-day mission for the two astronauts, Butch and Suni, pictured here. This is Butch, this is Suni, or Sunita Williams and Butch Wilmore. But it's been plagued with problems since its invention, but also since it has launched. So to catch you up, en route to the ISS. So remember, it launched on the 5th, they docked on the 6th. So it was not super long trip. There were 3 helium leaks. One was known, 2 were new. So we have 2 new leaks en route. And then 5 thrusters went out. They were able to recover 4 of them. So thrusters, when you're in space, Newton's laws become really, really important, right?
Mm-hmm.
You will remain in motion unless you have some sort of force that will push you into a different direction, unless something else acts upon you. And for these capsules, how they do that is through thrusters. You don't need a huge rocket launch to move around in space. You just need a small little push, and
Mm-hmm.
those thrusters provide that. They're very, very important for the Starliner. They're important for any spacecraft, but for the Starliner especially. So the 3 helium manifolds were closed in flight during the sleep period, which is what they were supposed to do. All 3 were reopened before rendezvous with the ISS and before docking. And after docking, all of the manifolds are supposed to be closed per the normal planning. But as Starliner began to approach the ISS, 5 of the reaction control thrusters failed off, which is bad. Hot fire tests were performed. They were able to get the 4 of the thrusters back on, while the crew of 2 manually piloted the spacecraft at the 200-meter hold point. So you don't just drive up to the ISS and park. Like, you drive a bit and then you stop, and you drive up a bit and you stop, right? You make sure everything's working before you dock. Docking is dangerous because you're connecting 2 points.
Right.
Once the 4 thrusters were back, Starliner was able to approach the space station safely for docking because they had some control. At the 10-meter hold point, the mission team were able to complete system readiness evaluations and proceeded with docking, and the crew entered the ISS at 12:45 p.m. June 6th.
Okay.
So it was a problem, but they were able to overcome it. The big problem is that only 4 of those thrusters were recovered. 1 has not been recovered, which is manageable. The big problem is they don't know why they went out in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the big safety issue, because to be able to come back, they don't want those thrusters to fail. The thrusters are necessary to make sure the spacecraft is oriented properly for and to perform the deorbit burn, right?
Right.
As they come
Yeah.
back to Earth. Without that, they're kind of, just falling with no
Mm.
no control over what's
Yeah.
happening, which is very, very dangerous. So those 2 astronauts have been on board the ISS since June 6th. So 2 months now they have been on board on what was supposed to be an 8-day long mission, and there is still no notice of when they'll be able to come back. And so for the viewers, I want you to just think in your heads, maybe, when might these 2 be able to come home from their extended journey? Because I was thinking, it'll be, they got to figure out the problem, and the fact they haven't figured out the problem is a bit scary. Boeing and NASA both are very adamant that they are not stranded, and technically the astronauts aren't stranded. Even
Mm-hmm.
when they were up in space, I think just a few months in July, I think it was, there was a safety alarm. The crew had to go into their spacecrafts. The ISS detected debris. There was a debris cloud. So for safety, they go into the spacecrafts in case they need to emergency egress. And so in the case of emergency, if there's a depressurization, if there's a fire, if they have to leave, they can go in Starliner, right? If in an emergency, they can leave, which to me does not strike a lot of faith. but they can leave if it's an emergency,
Right.
but they can't just come home. And so yesterday it was reported that the potential return date for these astronauts is February 2025.
Ooh.
Oof, indeed, unless they figure out the problem. So all but one of those 28 thrusters are working. That worry is that they all may fail again because they don't know why they failed in the first place, which is
Hmm.
really bad. You want to know why something broke. You need those thrusters at flight end, like I said, to keep the capsule right side up during the deorbit burn and to help perform the deorbit burn. So there are a couple possibilities here. Either they figure it out and they can come home, or they somehow, NASA uploads something where they can just cut the Starliner free and maybe they go home with the other astronauts. That's not very likely though. Again, they're not stranded, but whatever. NASA, it's looking more likely, may go with a SpaceX return. So Boeing's competitor will have to get their astronauts back. In this case, Starliner would be cut loose from its docking port to open up one of those parking spots for the US capsules, for the Dragon capsule to come up. Before that happens, though, Wilmore and Williams would need to fashion seats for themselves in the SpaceX Dragon capsule currently docked at the space station. So that's the plan if they go back with this current crew. They would need to build themselves seats inside that capsule because it's only meant for 4 people, and those
Bill-
4 people are already up there.
Wait, they have to build their own seats?
Yeah, they'd have to because you need a lifeboat, right? Like it's the way they're built. You need a lifeboat, right? And your seat is your lifeboat essentially. So they'd have to, yeah. So that's why the idea instead is that once Starliner's docking port is empty, if they just cut it off and send it back to Earth and it's a wash,
Yeah.
um, they stay on board and the crew of 4 leaves that's supposed to leave. And then the next crew comes up, but 2 astronauts get bumped. So 4 astronauts are supposed to go up in the next crew up to the ISS. Dragon is meant to carry 4. And if they want to bring Butch and Suni down without them having to craft their own seats, they would have to bump 2 astronauts off of this next flight. That Dragon would go up to the ISS, but those 2 astronauts still have to serve out their mission, right? Their replacements don't come for 6 months. So that would mean Butch and Suni would be up there. They'd have empty seats to go home, but they'd be up there for a total of 8 months, which is long. The other option is they make it work. They find out why they failed and they can come home. They're going to make the official decision mid-August. So stay tuned.
My flight was delayed, 5 hours coming back from Calgary, so for all you out
Yeah.
there that may be experiencing, some
The
some
exact same
delays,
thing.
this is
Yeah.
the most extreme of flight delays. Well, thanks, Marley. Fun to get back into this. Now, for our last few minutes of the show today, we should probably let people in on what's happening for our next show on August the 22nd, because it ends up being, going to be a very important show. So if you are a fan of Ask an Astronomer for the last little bit, you should know what's going to be happening. Marley, what is happening?
I'm leaving the Space Center. Yeah. The crowd boos very loudly. I'm leaving. I'm going back to school. So that, yeah, this will be my last show 2 weeks from now. Ask an Astronomer, August 22nd, the end of an era, I guess.
Well, it's going to be, it's certainly going to be an end of an era, because it's not only is it going to be Marley's last show, but it is actually going to be maybe not the final Ask an Astronomer show, but after that we're putting the show on pause, because of course we're going to be onboarding potentially a new astronomer, and we're heading into a busy school season. So, and Ask an Astronomer started, in 2020. It was a way for me and Rachel, if you remember, Rachel Wang, or Marley's predecessor, and I was doing shows from my kitchen. Those were our first Ask an Astronomer shows, So this show has been, of course, really important for me to connect with the audience during that time when we couldn't be connected with all of you. Of course, all of our previous shows are still on YouTube. So if you're new to Ask an Astronomer Land, you can go back through our whole catalog, 3 years plus worth of shows that are on there. But we still got one more. So you certainly want to tune in. If you want to get in here, if you want any question asked, you can email it to us. Email info@spacecenter.ca. Send in your question. We will answer all of the questions for the final Ask an Astronomer with Marley, and also the final Ask an Astronomer with us for a while. Marley, I'm going to miss you, of course, a lot, but really excited to see that you are going and staying in education and be going to become a
Yes.
teacher, because we know that teachers are near and dear to our heart. They are some of the most important people in society. So thank you so much, Marley, for being amazing. And thank you, all of you out there watching on YouTube land, or possibly on Instagram. Come on back for the final Ask Astronomer on August 22nd, 4 p.m. Pacific time. We'll see you all then.